War leaves visible scars on landscapes, cities, and bodies. But some of the most enduring wounds are the ones we cannot see etched into the minds of those who have lived through combat. The experience of war pushes the human psyche to its limits, challenging our understanding of resilience, trauma, and the boundaries of the self. Behind every medal, behind every salute, there often lies an inner battle that continues long after the last shot is fired. This is the story of the psychology of soldiers, their struggles with combat stress, and the complex condition known as post-traumatic stress disorder. In combat, the human body enters a heightened physiological state designed for survival. The brain's threat detection system, centered around the amygdala, activates the fight or flight response. Adrenaline surges. Heart rate spikes. Blood flows away from the digestive system and into the muscles. Cognitive functions narrow, focusing solely on immediate survival. While these reactions are adaptive in the short term, they can be damaging when sustained over weeks or months. Soldiers in prolonged conflict zones often live in a state of hyperarousal, a kind of constant alertness that prepares them for danger at any moment. This state can become embedded, persisting long after the soldier has returned home, triggering anxiety, flashbacks, or aggressive behavior in situations that are objectively safe. What we now recognize as psychological trauma in soldiers has been documented for centuries, although it was understood very differently in the past. During World War I, thousands of troops were diagnosed with shell shock, a term that suggested a physical cause related to exposure to artillery blasts. But many who exhibited symptoms paralysis, tremors, disassociation had not been near explosions. The psychological impact of relentless trench warfare, sleep deprivation, and the death of comrades was evident, but poorly understood. In World War II, the terminology shifted to combat fatigue, or battle exhaustion, and while treatments began to focus more on rest and recovery, the stigma remained. Soldiers suffering from mental breakdowns were often seen as weak. It wasn't until 1980 that the American Psychiatric Association officially recognized post-traumatic stress disorder in its diagnostic and statistical manual, largely in response to the psychological toll seen in veterans of the Vietnam War. Post-traumatic stress disorder is a complex mental health condition that arises after exposure to traumatic events. In the case of soldiers, these events often involve the threat of death, injury, or witnessing acts of violence. PTSD manifests through a cluster of symptoms: intrusive memories or flashbacks, avoidance of reminders, distorted mood and cognition, and persistent hyperarousal. On a neurological level, PTSD is marked by an overactive amygdala, a smaller and less responsive hippocampus, and impaired functioning of the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for regulating emotions and assessing threats. Essentially, the brain becomes rewired for danger, interpreting everyday occurrences as a car backfiring, a crowded room as threats, leading to responses that seem irrational to outsiders but are deeply rooted in altered brain chemistry. Treating PTSD requires both psychological and physiological approaches. Cognitive behavioral therapy, particularly prolonged exposure and cognitive processing therapy, helps individuals gradually face traumatic memories and reframe distorted beliefs. Another method, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing EMDR, uses guided eye movements while the individual recalls trauma, helping to unstick painful memories from the brain's emotional centers. Medication can assist in managing symptoms, but it is rarely a standalone solution. Equally important are non-clinical forms of healing support groups, creative expression, physical activity, service animals, and structured reintegration programs. Recovery is not about forgetting the trauma, but learning to live with it, integrating the experience rather than being controlled by it. An often overlooked aspect of combat trauma is moral injury a deep psychological and spiritual wound that arises not from fear, but from guilt, shame, or betrayal. Soldiers may experience moral injury when they are involved in, witness, or fail to prevent acts that violate their moral code. A medic unable to save a child, a drone operator who witnesses civilian casualties, a soldier ordered to commit violence against non-combatants. These experiences can cause a fracture in the sense of self. Unlike PTSD, which is often rooted in fear and survival, moral injury centers around existential questions. Am I still a good person? Can I be forgiven? Healing from moral injury involves moral repair, reconnecting with values, finding meaning, and often engaging with community or spiritual practices that allow for reconciliation and redemption. The struggle with PTSD is not just a personal battle, it's a societal one. Soldiers do not fight wars alone, and they should not face their trauma alone. Yet many veterans hesitate to seek help. They fear being seen as unstable or weak. They worry about their careers, their families, or simply do not know where to turn. Societal stigma, inadequate healthcare access, and bureaucratic barriers often exacerbate the problem. Suicide rates among veterans remain tragically high, a stark reminder of the invisible cost of war. Reintegration into civilian life requires more than thank you for your service gestures. It requires meaningful support, accessible mental health care, job training, social connection, and, above all, understanding. Civilian society must recognize that the wounds of war extend far beyond the battlefield, and that healing is a collective responsibility. Ultimately, the psychology of soldiers teaches us something profound about the human condition. It reveals how deeply we are shaped by our experiences, how resilient yet fragile the mind can be, and how essential it is to approach trauma, not with judgment, but with compassion. War may be as old as humanity itself, but our understanding of its psychological toll is still evolving. As we learn more, we must not only advance treatments, we must also change our culture. Because long after the war's end, the people who fought them carry the burden, and it is up to all of us to help them come home.